Hi, I'm Sinta Ebersohn. I'm the founder of Get Up and Grow, and welcome to this version of an interview for International Men's Health Week, which is from the 14th to the 20th of June. As you know, I'm having interviews with remarkable men who are here to share their stories and their experiences of adversities that they faced and what they did to overcome it. With me today is Tarquin Ogilvie. Tarquin, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. So Tarquin, share with us your story. Where did it start?
So I think the topic being on adversity, it'd be a good candidate to speak about injuries in combat sports and the kind of frustrating nature of combat sports and how I've had ups and downs with my mental health. And I think mental health for athletes is a very tricky road because they put a lot of their mental health fundamentally underlies into the performance of their sports or their craft. And being a young athlete whose kind of introduction into combat sports, I mean, combat sports is a very unforgiving mistress, you know. The injuries can be long-term, they can be very severe. And you know, a lot of athletes put themselves in a position where their relationship to the sport is very mentally rewarding when their body's on the line. But yeah, I mean, combat sports is a big part of my life. I started training with Steve Bazia at SPG when I was about 7 years old.
Goodness, that's young.
Yeah, so big influential figure in my life, and I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu my whole life. I took it more seriously when I was about 16 years old in 2017. By 2018, at 16 to 17, I fully joined all the adult classes, and then I started my competitive journey in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was up and down for many years, just going from kind of tournament to injury, back to tournament to injury, till most recently I broke and dislocated my shoulder in a mixed martial arts fight. So yeah, it's been a long, quite rough journey. But now I work as a mixed martial arts striking coach. I have a business with Sinta's son, Ruben. We write strength and conditioning programs for people. So I mean, through all the adversity, I've definitely decided that it's been worth it as a career that I want to pursue, you know. So yeah.
Interesting. It sounds like it's been a tough journey for you. You saying you've gone from injury to tournament, to injury to tournament. Tell us more about that.
So I think the first I'm not really sure where to start off, if it's like starting off with the first injury, but I think I always had small little things that were kind of benign and very much part of the sport. And that is something that, I mean, you just have to accept. But it racked up to a place where I worked out that over a certain period of training combat sports, I was more injured than active. But I mean, I also, obviously, I want to be hesitant because I encourage everyone to do mixed martial arts and to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I just think that the turn that you can take as a competitor is a little bit different, and it comes down to how you roll, how you practice martial arts that can prevent a lot of injuries. So I have to be very careful here because I want to unpack the injury story, but I don't want to, put out bad publicity for the sport that I do. But realistically, yeah, I mean, my first more major long-term injury was towards lockdown, where I had, there was a few little bits and pieces before competitions, like, sprained ankle, broke my finger, things that for a lot of people, if you bust your ankle and you're not working, sort of walking around for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that in most people's lives is just a little bit of a setback. I can't walk my dog, I can't go out and visit my friend, I can't go out and drink tonight, and that's kind of enough for them to get bummed. But in the combat sports world, those things are benign. What's severe is tearing a cruciate ligament. What's severe is having to go get a knee replacement. That's up there. And the little things that kind of set you back and frustrate you are just completely part and parcel of what we do. But first one, which was quite difficult, was in lockdown. I was meant to get my blue belt. It took my blue belt took, I think, 4 scheduled gradings before I actually got it. And the first injury that stopped that was I think this was the 3rd scheduled time. Because lockdown prevented the first part of it, and then I went for this hike, and just the way I had bad stability around one of my knees, so it wasn't even from combat sports, but for about 3-4 months I was out with very bad knee tendonitis. I would go to walk and it would just feel like stabbing pain in my knee. So I was pretty immobile, and this is obviously in lockdown, so the social life wasn't very high, but it was just towards getting back where gyms were kind of able to run training under certain caveats, like people wearing masks and things like this. And it had been about half a year of me really wanting this grading, because lockdown had taken away from me, and it was like, fuck, it was like another, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this. Okay, awesome. It was like, fuck, okay, another 4 months of having to wait around, while everyone's going and getting graded, and there's a little bit of jealousy that comes into play, because it's like, why me? But that seemingly kind of trivial. And then where it really became quite rough was I came back and everyone's kind of joking about sort of bubble wrapping me. And this is right before my next grading. This is the end of 2020. And I was helping out a friend of mine, Lewis Mataya, who's in Zimbabwe at the moment, a phenomenal mixed martial artist. And I was helping him out in his fight camp. And I joked, it was about 3 days before my grading, and I was joking around in the training room because it was quite intense training with the fight camp. I'm like, yeah, lo and behold, I tear my ACL.
Oh no.
Right before, so knock on wood, like I was tempting fate. Because at the time there was a lot of talk about ACL tears with more leg locks. It was a kind of a phase of leg locks becoming big in jiu-jitsu again. And a lot of the leg lock techniques like heel hooks result in cruciate ligament tears. And so people talking about the consequences of that with jiu-jitsu and ACLs being very long-term injuries, 9 months to a year, and you're looking at surgery. So often there's like a prehab phase that guys have to go in for, especially in places like the States, the surgeries are quite expensive. And then you have that 9 months post-op, and you are dealing with a compromised knee afterwards. So it can be long-term, and it can definitely put your competitive career on the line. So it was like a very dreaded injury. And so, of course, I tempt fate by making this joke, and I shit you not, in that practice, I eat a judo sweep, my foot stays on the floor, knee goes in, I feel the springy pop on the inside of my knee, and I'm still sparring with some of the other guys, and every time I went to go stand on the knee, when I threw a punch or something, the knee would just buckle and wobble in like that. And I kind of walked around for the rest of the day knowing that something was off, until that very next morning it had swollen up, it had locked out. I contacted my physio about this. He's like, by the time he tested the laxity around the knee, he's like, yeah, you're looking at a torn cruciate ligament. So yeah, that was the beginning of, the very first kind of severe injury.
So can I just ask you there, what you mentioned now, the progress of the treatment from the injury means you could be out of action for a year or even longer. Yeah,
and that obviously depends on the complexity of what's going on around the knee. I don't, obviously I'm not a physio, I'm not a doctor, so I can't go into detail, but sometimes when there are other complications with meniscus, with other bits and pieces that happen in the what they call the kind of mechanism of injury, how you sustain that injury, there are things that could take longer. But 9 months for a competitive athlete, a year is not quite a death sentence, but it can take a good bit of time out of your prime, because you've got 1 year, and 1 year, if you're not able to train in a particular way, your strength and conditioning is going to atrophy. Your skills are going to it's not that your skills decrease, but you're not staying sharp, you know, and it's not just, you know, you're going to recover and then you've made a physical full recovery. And so now you can go back into it. There's a rebuild phase that needs to happen. So, you know, for an athlete, you can sometimes, you know, let's say it takes you a year to become fully recovered from this injury. You still have to now adjust for at least 3, maybe 4 months to build up your strength and conditioning back to where it was and get your sharpness back to where it was. So it's definitely a big competitive layoff for sure.
I can imagine. So just to help me get the picture, or anybody else watching this video, if you've been preparing for a specific tournament or competition and you have an injury, like you just told us, days before, and you're out of action for several months or maybe a year or even longer, depending on how you recover, are you going to easily just pick up where you left off, or are you actually going to lose some of the
training along
and
the
the
way?
built up and everything?
So I think that really comes down to mindsets, and I think that's the advice that I give to other people. There's always something you can do. I think for athletes who, you know, it's a bit like having a power breed and a dog, you know, where they, you know, you want to walk them twice a day because they get pent up. I think that's what happens is particularly a lot of men in combat sports, I mean, these are very nice people, and the stereotype of them being thugs and hooligans isn't true, but I think there's definitely, I don't consider myself as someone who falls into this demographic, but I've met a lot of those men, a lot of guys who do mixed martial arts. They do have, for sure, they have an axe to grind, you know, they have something to prove, and it's not necessarily just an insecurity, but it's just their fate and their destiny, but there's something in there that they need to do. So in terms of how well you pick up where you left off, it's like, I think when a lot of people get that adjustment, they become very depressed, and it's like, fuck, well, the years are right off, so let me just kind of let it go. And you don't feel the physical reward if your baseline is I'm high performance, and now you have to humble yourself because you have to learn how to flipping walk again. There's a big bit of dignity that I think can get stripped for those guys, and there's a big bit of pride because particularly people in combat sports, they like walking around knowing that they can handle themselves. And when you have a injury like that, you cannot handle yourself. You know, you go from apex predator to wounded prey animal.
Even if you have the technique, you're physically not able.
100%. You know, you can, like when you 1 month post ACL tear, I mean, if you get a 10-year-old girl to just sidekick your knee, you're not going to be having a fun time. So I think even though in today's day and age, the risk is a lot lower, that mentality of, as I say, predator, the kind of predator's a lot for these athletes to deal with, because it's just not how you want to view yourself spiritually, psychologically, But the mindset of, I think for me, I still watch combat sports videos. I still, anything, I had an amazing physio help me through the whole process, Greg Hunt, who rolls with us as well. And his physio approach is very much orientated around not sheltering people, too much at all. The moment that you win back the ability to actually use what you can, he has you using what you can. And that's a huge part of the mental health process. So I would not be, I'm indebted to him for so many different injuries. I would not be able to return mentally the way that I did if it wasn't for him. So the long-winded answer is, I think if you are committed to healing and to improving, if you have that will to succeed, it makes a big difference, as opposed to if you are kind of stuck enjoying the pity, so to speak. So the improvements in how well you're going to return is 95% mental, and the other 5% is just, are you disciplined enough to do rehab, or how your body recovers from the surgery or something like that.
Because I can imagine it takes a whole lot of diligence to recover, especially if it's a very severe injury.
Yeah.
But I want to also get you to talk a little bit about your prime that you mentioned. But before we get into that, tell us how you got into mixed martial arts and how did you get onto Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? How did you find your thing?
Yeah, I think so. It's a good question. I mean, I remember way back as a kid, there was some book at the library. I don't even know how it came about, but my gran used to take me to the library all the time, and there was this book on ninjas and ancient Japan, and I love the whole aesthetic of Japanese culture and Japanese history. It's still something that I enjoy. I have a kind of semi-traditional Japanese tattoo on my arm. And around that time, it was, obviously martial arts is a predominant thing in traditional Japanese culture. And so I wanted to train something, and it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I don't think my parents knew exactly what it was, but they kind of saw, hey, he's liking the idea of martial arts, and there's this place just up the road, and that was it. I remember my dad it's still one of those kind of very early childhood memories. My father is a music teacher and a phenomenal drum teacher. We were sitting outside the gym, and I was kind of too scared to enter, and he just said, no, just walk through the door and you'll see everything will change once you're inside. And it's kind of a bit of a trippy psychedelic memory, that because then I did walk through the door, and then I blink and I'm having my first mixed martial arts fight with the very same coach in my corner. So yeah, it was a downhill slide. It started there, and then it just kept going.
And how much of it do you think is talent, and how much of it is hard work?
Look, I would say a lot of it is hard work, but I've seen people walk through the door who are just genetic phenoms for the sport, and they pick up on it extremely quickly. I'm definitely not one of those people. I have a familiarity with grappling, but no, I'm not any kind of genetic phenom. Obviously it's physical, so in the competitive side, attributes are important, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one of those things where it's one of the few martial arts where it's very cerebral. It's the point that you have a lot of feedback on how very technical people in the sport do phenomenally well despite not having the best attributes. Okay. It's not like a 100-meter sprint where at the end of the day, it's this guy's gas tank versus this guy's gas tank, and it's kind of a very mechanical issue. Obviously I'm not saying the mentality of these sprinters and how they, it's not a sport I know anything about. There are obviously plenty of other factors that lead up to competition, but combat sports is very different because there's a lot more of a decision-making and cerebral aspect that comes into it. So it's not just the bigger, more athletic guy wins the fight, although that matters. So I think the most important thing to success in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or mixed martial arts is your mentality towards the sport and how you approach learning, which is one of the reasons I love the gym that I'm at, because competitiveness is obviously part of it, but people get very lost in their success in combat sports of how well they can dominate other people in the practice room. And that actually has nothing to do with your progress. And there's a point where it hinders your progress. Okay. You need to fall in love with jiu-jitsu, not fall in love with winning. You need to fall in love with technique. And, I've had this where when I kind of, we can roll in a way where even if I have better physical attributes to you, you can train yourself to grapple where it's kind of pure technique versus technique. And that's where, sometimes I'll be rolling with a totally different demographic of people. I've rolled with professional mixed martial artists. I've rolled with, kind of hobbyist smaller women in their 30s, 40s, and then I've rolled with, young kids, and having that environment just means that, and I've rolled with, athletic, very big guys, and you try and learn to compete in the same way so that you can purely see where your technique is versus theirs. And quite often when I've rolled in this way, I get absolutely destroyed by, a 45-year-old female purple belt who's 52 kilos, because at the end of the day, her jiu-jitsu is just that much more than mine. But it is rolling in that way to not guard your own ego that gets you the furthest in the sport. So it's a very humbling thing for particularly young guys to do, so but I think that style of training is the most conducive to longevity in the sport. I think when your ego gets involved, that's where injuries come about and you don't progress as fast. So
it makes sense. And I'd love for us to talk more about you teaching young guys in a moment. So tell me about the prime in your sport, what you're doing in light of when is your prime and how are your injuries and the periods of you being out of action and spending time on recovery? How's that affecting your prime window? What do you call that?
I think the prime so there are a few ways that we could interpret the question. Like the standard prime for a mixed martial arts athlete is kind of seen as your late 20s and early 30s, like with what Ruben does and what strength athletes do, that only seems to develop into your 40s, is kind of where sometimes people more so hit their strength prime, late 30s. And in combat sports, by the time you're in your late 30s, it's considered that you're getting old. But athletically, classically speaking, is an argument maybe to be made that when you're in your sort of approaching 25, just before then, but definitely a good bit after your early 20s, that's a good window for an athletic prime to be. I think in my case, I'm kind of probably only sort of approaching my prime now. But I've taken I've taken quite a bit of wear and tear before then, which is why I'm putting more of a hiatus on competition, because I've just been very unlucky in the injuries that I sustained. I'm in a place where I could rehab myself to compete again. But it's been a bit much sort of on off. I've got some other goals that I want to set myself towards before I do, but I will return to competition at some stage.
So how old are you now, just to get us in the picture?
Turning 22, 21. 22,
okay, all right.
And I've been seriously training in the sport since I was about 16. So
while I was listening to you, I was thinking of how many years of preparation do you actually need? Because you said you started when you were a child.
So
so you've had many years of preparation, and I'm well aware of the fact that when you're that young, you just start with basic building blocks. I mean, you don't jump in and start doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu on day one. Hey?
Yeah, well, you're doing the kind of foundational phases of it, but it's a lot more games with the kids and kind of very basic things, and then as you get older, you get introduced to more advanced stuff. The preparation to compete, I think it's the different levels of competition. I think mixed martial arts is definitely one of the more high risk kind of places to throw in athletes who are not as well prepared. And that's the one reason why I love the gym that I'm at, is that when you do get thrown into a fight, you have to ask for it, and you need to be very well prepared yourself. And my coach has always been very good at sheltering his athletes in that kind of way. But in the grappling side of things, maybe 6 months or a year into your training as a white belt, you can compete against other white belts and then kind of grow from there. But in my case, my mixed martial arts fight was something that had been kind of years, in the making.
In the making.
Yeah.
So you have quite a number of years under the belt.
Yeah.
And you can just continue building on that.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I want it to be a lifelong journey,
Yeah.
I want to be rolling until I'm 60 if I make it that far.
And that is possible.
Yes, it is.
That is possible. It's not actually a sport that you're going to grow too old for.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's something which my coach and I have spoken about quite a bit, is longevity in the sport and what it takes to roll and just be able to, okay, maybe not compete. I mean, look, realistically, anytime you compete, there is risk involved. You cannot, it's just the nature of what it is. But
Yes.
to do jiu-jitsu, it doesn't have to be this thing that you get injured. And my biggest advice for people to avoid the longer term injuries is to fall in love with jiu-jitsu more than winning, because it's when competitiveness in the wrong place gets involved in the training room. I mean, we have one of the better gyms, but there are some other gyms out there where it's like competition style fighting all the time, unchecked egos. And yeah, people are getting hurt left, right, and center. And you might produce athletic phenoms now, but no one's hanging around in those gyms into their 30s and 40s, because it's just like a Darwinian. All the ones that got fucked aren't even in the gym to begin with. So all you're going to see in the gym is prime athletic kind of specimens because of the way that they train and compete. And you just don't hear about the people because they're off on the sidelines getting knee replacements and shoulder arms and things like that. So I think it's a mentality thing. If you fall in love with the art for what it is, it changes the way that you approach it, and it'll make more sense when you actually are in a gym or, and I'm speaking to a very specific demographic of people who are actually in the sport, but when you really fall in love with the sport for the cerebral nature of it and choose when to put on that competitive side is when you're going to be safe and you can have longevity in the sport into your past your midlife, sort of ages. I
can see that you are very passionate about it, and when you say you've got to fall in love with the sport, I can just see your whole body language light up. Thank you for sharing that with us. I love the word grappling. It's such a climb in there and get it done word for me. Can we talk a bit about the other things that you grapple with when you're on this journey as an athlete and you get injured? How does that affect other aspects of your life? What else do you grapple with when you find yourself in that situation?
Quite a few things. I think, as I say, like self-image and self-esteem. A lot of the reasons that guys approach combat sports, you can, like, I think you can have many other areas of your life where you're not very particularly deem yourself to be successful, and combat sports. I mean, I speak from my own personal experience, and we'll see if other competitors can relate to this, but it's like, I think combat sports for men is saying it's an outlet is a little bit sort of stereotypical, but it's the one place where you can win back a lot of your pride and your dignity, and because it's humbling in a way, your place in a particular hierarchy, and that's also fulfilling because you know where you're going, you know where you stand. So there's a very solid level of security.
That makes sense.
And also, once you engage in something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's very effective for someone like me who grew up in my school career is kind of on the fringes of mainstream culture and society, and I didn't really know how to deal with my masculinity. There's a very rewarding thing about grappling because once you begin to get good at it, you can absolutely dominate people who are not trained in the sport. So we would have, me as a 17-year-old guy, barely did any strength and conditioning, but I was about a year into grappling, and we would have rugby players, big like gym guys who, now I don't consider the apex of fighting, but to the average person, you would look at 17-year-old me and, you know, big Bruce in the corner, and you'd go, okay, well, Tarquin's going to get fucked up. And then, you know, 5 minutes later, it's like, it's 5 minutes of a roll of this guy getting exhausted and me just choosing what submission to put him in. And that will happen to anyone who trains any combat sport that you train that somebody else doesn't train. You will develop that ability to do that to them. You know, you take 1 year of boxing versus no boxing, you make those two people spar, one guy's going to get fucked up, and it's just anecdotal. And so when we're talking about pride for men, it's like, the reason why I bring that up is that feeling is the one time, it's the one little piece of escapism where you can go there and you do win a lot of your sort of dignity. You know, your romantic life can be falling apart, you know, your career could be in shambles, but one way or another, when you step on the mat, you know where you stand and you're very confident in your skills there. So how it affected me was, I think it happened to me at a time where I think my masculine kind of identity was a little on the line. You know, I didn't really know where I stood in terms of what I wanted to do with my career. You know, I had some issues in my sort of romantic life, and and I'd always, you know, in terms of how I fitted into other people, there's always been a part of me that's been a little bit more artistic and more feminine, with kind of love of music and things like that. And so combat sports was a little escapism for me that allowed me to get in touch with, you know, a lot more of my masculinity. So when the injury kind of takes that away, you're very much forced to look at other aspects of your life that you might be running away from, you know. So it wasn't fun. It was not fun. You know, but that's probably because I took an unhealthy relationship to the sport, using it as escapism. You know, it's the same way if you force an alcoholic to become clean, you know, he suddenly has to look at all of his shitty life choices that brought him there. It's very different to if he can just distract himself, you know.
Interesting that you say that. One can have an unhealthy relationship to your sport.
Yeah, 100%.
What do you mean with that? It rules everything else, or it overrules everything else?
So I think to some degree, like athletes, true competitive athletes, I mean, the truth is that, okay, I'm not in, I wouldn't say I'm in this demographic, but a lot of them are a little bit touched. They're, you know, they've got a few screw looses, and it's what allows them to do as brilliantly as they do. Some of them don't. Some of them are really just perfectly ordinary, normal human beings. But I mean, whatever the fuck normal means, because you know, which I'm sure you've realized as a therapist, you speak to everyone and they've got baggage.
Yes,
you know, everyone's got some kind of trauma. Everyone's got some kind of baggage. So I don't think there is such thing as a stable, normal human being.
No.
But I definitely, the injuries, I would say I'm very grateful for them for forcing me to look at other aspects of my life and forcing me to slow down, stripping me of a bit of pride, you know.
Well, it sounds like you can fall hard going through an experience like that also. And I must say, I agree with you. I don't think there's one recipe for normal. There are a lot of things in the world, in society, in our cultures that we can find to be the norm in certain communities or certain societies, but that by no means makes it normal. It's about perspective, and I think it's open for interpretation, and we can have a whole other conversation about that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I find it interesting that certain characters with certain qualities or characteristics will be good in one particular sport.
Yes.
Or maybe not even a sport, maybe a certain kind of job or career or whatever. And that's how we all find a place where we fit in, which brings me to the other thing that I also realized as I was listening to you, the great, immense value there is in having something that you're good at.
Yeah, 100%.
Having something that you are competitive at, or what that you
Yes,
can
yes.
actually measure yourself amongst
Yeah,
other people and be
sure.
good and stand out to be one of the good ones, or one of the
Yes,
best,
yes.
or the best sometimes.
yes. Yeah, I think that's a very important. I think it's a very important part of happiness for young men, is having some kind of healthy hierarchy. You know, I think hierarchy is a word that becomes quite demonized, but you know, it really depends how it's run. I mean, it's not this dictatorship, but you know, you look at something like the belt rankings, and there's this healthy culture where you're learning from the higher belts and you're working your way towards there. But you can also see that it's a hierarchy based on competence. If it's a good gym, because they've earned that belt, and you know, in 95% of the time, that purple belt is going to tap you as the blue belt, and the blue belt is going to tap the white belt, and but the environment is that you're all learning from each other. And that, you know, what you're talking about, an environment where you stand out and where you're good at something, it's the reason why I think that hierarchy is so healthy is because you will humble others and you will be humbled.
Yes.
So it's just a very, you know, it's a very perpetual kind of cycle.
And it's safe also in a way, because you know exactly where you stand, where you fit in also,
Yes.
which in this day and age, I think with a lot of social things that are going on, it's challenging for many people to
100%.
have a place somewhere where they fit in. And it's not necessarily about labels and things like that.
Yeah.
There's an age-old ancient hierarchy in your sport that's existed for centuries, literally. And it's a safe place to be also, to play around in.
And I think there's also what is beautiful about combat sports is that there's a very you know, if you can leave your ego at the door as you walk in, it is the truth. You know, there's a lot of other hierarchies that are, you know, in today's day and age, a lot of social hierarchies that are predicated on pretentiousness. You know, where I think the most egotistical people are the ones who win, and that's not really, you know, what I love about combat sports is that it's always this. It's a very honest hierarchy. You know, you can walk in there and you can be twice as rich and twice as good looking, and you know, not that those are all like bad hierarchies, but you can absolutely have it all and then get floored by a little 5'1", you know, purple belt who's been rolling for the past, you know, whatever it is, you know, 6 years, and it immediately just slots you back down. And it's the truth, you know, there's no hiding, there's no, you know, a lot of people, at least when you see the kind of pissing contest at bars with men, there's this, but if it's a real fight, you know, just do this, or you know, there's no way. But it's like, well, okay, let's find out, you know. And then once you find out, there's no more hypothetical. It's like everyone saw it, and so you know where you are.
It reminds me of what you said earlier also about being in love with the sport and not being in love with winning. So
that's exactly that's exactly
it's a beautiful concept. I love that. So tell me, how does these, if I can call them ups and downs, because you're on this journey of preparing as an athlete, you're climbing the hierarchy, you're working hard, you're practicing and exercising and doing all the right lifestyle things to get to whatever your goals are that you've set for yourself. Now you hit with these injuries. So it's an up and down thing, and it's been quite an up and down thing for you over the last few years. How does that affect the people around you, the people close to you?
So, I mean, to put it just in like a brief summary of what those injuries are and the stuff, maybe I should have opened up with this, and you can ask if there's any particular one that you want to go into detail with. But I had bad case of knee tendonitis, wasn't walking properly, rescheduled my grading, tore my ACL. About 6 months later, I was back on the mat and I was able to train again. And then there was kind of a brief period of everything being all right, but me slowly winning that back. And then I competed in a tournament where I thought I tore my hip labrum. And it probably wasn't a hip labral tear. We don't fully know, but it was probably some kind of bad tendinopathy around the hip. And that was another 9 months out. That was from 2022 to the end of 2022. And then I spent the end of that year, I got concussed twice. But that concussion, by the way, actually had nothing to do with my gym that I train at. That was some of my own endeavors, which I won't really talk about on here, but it was just bad decision making. But nonetheless, it happened, got my brain damage, it's all there. And then I spent the time after that preparing for a mixed martial arts fight. And that was about 4-5 months later. I was desperate to fight. I'll be honest about it now. I actually kind of slightly bent the truth to some of the medical examiners before the fight, asking if I'd been concussed before I competed. And I said, no, I haven't been concussed in the past year. Meanwhile, I've been concussed twice, but there were so many injuries before then that it stopped me from fighting. I didn't give a shit. I was willing to just do anything to get in there. Even my mentality was, I just want to get in, have my first mixed martial arts fight. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if I get injured severely in the fight. I just want to make it to the ring. And I did make it to the ring, and then had a bad slip up, landed after a takedown, and dislocated my shoulder. And that was 3 months ago. Those are the 5 kind of major injuries in the past 5 years or so, that have been the main ones.
So you've been in pain for quite a long time.
Yes. But Shem, you're asking how it affected other people in my life. So I just wanted to wrap that up to give the audience some context. I think I've been very lucky that I've had, throughout the whole journey, as I said, I've had Greg Hunt, my physiotherapist, who's been incredible to me. I've had my coach, Steve Bazia, who's brought me back in on the mats. And I would say, again, I am a little bit of the exception to the rule, in the sense that I don't know many other people who have been as injured as I have in this period. But it's not the norm, but I was just bad like Brian. It happened to me. And I think with those two with me, it was a huge support structure to have that other people don't always have. And my family's been very good as well. They kind of accepted that I wanted to take this road, but naturally, like, when you're injured, you're not really of help to other people around the house, or even sort of your friends socially. You're not really going out as much, so you're not quite the same human being. And so they don't necessarily have to nurture you, but they do have to step in on your behalf. And this is why, to some degree, there's a certain level of selfishness that you have to have as a competitive athlete, because it's not all on you, and naturally other people end up stepping in where you can't be there. And so I've just been very lucky that I've had a family who's been very accepting of the choices that I wanted to make. But I think it's rough on them, like particularly for my parents. They wanted, like, obviously it's like, well, why the fuck couldn't you do something else? Like, particularly I think for my father, because I've always been passionate about music, I think I don't know, it's never been spoken kind of between us, but I'm sure he always wondered, like, why don't you just pursue the music more? Why don't you pursue this other thing more? When they're just seeing me come in and out and in and out, and again, this is excluding all the benign things. Like, there was a period where, again, this is just from not training so well, but I would come back every Saturday limping with a busted ankle from when I'd be doing, you know, kickboxing sparring with Lewis. And it was like, that was just the norm. Like me just being fucked up all the time was kind of the norm. So, yeah, I mean, cauliflower flipping ears and my parents walking past and I'd be there with a syringe, like draining the blood, you know, for 4 months straight. And it's just it's an obscure lifestyle for people to be on the outside of looking in, you know. I think it's very difficult for them to understand.
Well, and I'm a mother myself, and I know on a certain level, I can imagine what your mom feels like every time you
100%.
you get injured that badly. But things that come up for me also as I'm listening to you is perseverance. You must have a hell of a lot of perseverance to keep going. Whereas if I listen to your story, I keep thinking it would have been so easy to just give up. Or maybe convince yourself that it's not, you're not meant to do this, or it's not meant to be, or something, yet you keep going.
I mean, I had my moments of doubts. Particularly when I got injured, and I always had it in the back of my head that I wanted to be a mixed martial arts coach. It's always kind of been my dream profession in a way, teaching martial arts. And you know, maybe even now I might expand it into like getting into the firearm world and teaching that. I mean, that's all kind of distant ideas, but I've always enjoyed things that are martial, and so when I had to start questioning if I could even pursue this as a career, there was a lot of circumstantial depression that came into that at the time of my life, particularly like back to my ACL injury, because, you know, I finished my matric quite late, you know, through lockdown and through fucking around. It was like 2 years late. And so in the back of my head, I was thinking, fuck, I need to finish this. And also, what kind of career am I going to take? And I opted to, you know, I could have chosen to, I don't know if I would have made it in, but my other friends were going the university route, and it was in the back of my head that, you know, either in the back of my head, it was either that I had to study very hard and make it into university to study something which I'm not passionate about. Or the other thing in the time of COVID was like, I need to go and get qualified in a job that will have long-term job security, like being a flipping plumber or an electrician, where, you know, there's reasonable pay in it as a skill. And on the back burner was this whole idea of being a martial arts coach. And so when these injuries came about, where it really affected my ability to persevere through was going, am I going to ever be able to choose to make a career out of this? And the more I get injured in this is the more that it's tailoring me towards some kind of job, which I hate, you know, and to me, that's like a little bit of a death sentence to kind of get sentenced to something that you are utterly passionless about doing, you know. And yeah, maybe it comes across as a little bit facetious, never having to have gone the 9-to-5 route. And I'm going to get a lot of flack from adults and people your age going to say, well, you know, you haven't proven that you can put something on the table yet. But on the flip side, I also roll with a lot of 45-year-olds who have midlife crisis. And then what do? They start jiu-jitsu at 45 years old because they go, fuck it, I want to actually live. So
isn't that interesting? And they might find themselves thinking, I've never tested myself on this level.
Yes.
Although I might have wanted to when I was a young boy. I find that quite interesting, because the expectations from society and the culture and the way we are raised and taught in schools and things are to go, you know, one of a few limited number of routes.
Yes.
And there are so many other ways to do that, and to live our lives. But yet here you are, and you are making your dreams come true, aren't you? You are actually coaching.
Coaching
young kids and other people,
and adults. And I'm my career, you know, my work in combat sports is only sort of expanding and into the strength and conditioning world and things like that. So I mean, it's a job like any other job, but when I can change that mentality, like I know how much of a big impact my coach had on me when I was growing up, and I try to keep that in the back of my head when I'm teaching a lot of these other young kids. You know, that there is a non-trivial role that you can have in their life. So then it becomes something that's very fulfilling. You know,
Yes.
every day I get to live out something that I think I was, you know, I do believe in fate to some degree. So I think I was given this path, and because of that kind of approach, it's like it's a responsibility that I'm just very happy to take up, you know.
And I'm sure you're enjoying it very much.
Yeah.
So tell me, with your experience and the number of injuries that you've had, specifically to your sport, that's affecting or impacting your sport or your vision with your sport that you want to go to, what would you say to other people? And it doesn't matter what age they are, actually. What would you say to youngsters who are starting out, older people, men going through their midlife crisis? I mean, we are in men's health.
Like I think in combat sports are more lessons from the injuries that apply to life in general. Like, which one, or both?
Both.
Both.
Well, whatever comes up for you.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think going into what I've learned is probably very interesting. People in combat sports, and it's been what I've been repeating throughout the podcast, is kind of fall in love with the art itself more than your place within it, because that's where a lot of my injuries came about that could have been avoided. But there's also a lesson in that applies to other things, where it's like, I've seen a lot of people fuck up, and particularly men fuck up here, where a lot of men don't want to appear incompetent. And all too often I've seen guys step onto the mat, and instead of just allowing themselves to lose and tap out and see where that goes, they can't just allow themselves to be incompetent or lose at something. And so that's where they start really resisting, and then it becomes a bit of a brawl, and then lo and behold, something pops, and then it's like, well, now you're here. But that applies to anything. Like I've taken that approach. You know, there are a lot of things that I can't do, and where my other friends excel and I know very little about. And you know, there's like, I never really grew up doing much hardware stuff and a lot of DIY stuff. And so, you know, when it comes to kind of using power tools and building things, there's definitely a gap of skill there. And combat sports have kind of allowed me to, you know, when I was in that environment, I was up building a house with one of my friends. I was kind of like, hey, how do I use this? You know, how does this work? Like, I haven't done this before, you know. And 90% of the time, it's like, you know, 6 months ago, Ruben taught me to ride a motorbike, and I'd never done that before. Instead of hopping on and trying to look like a natural and fucking crashing the bike, which happens all the time, by the way. You know, you always see these videos of people doing this kind of thing, and it's this very male thing, and maybe I'm sure women have it as well. It's, you look a lot more stable and confident if you approach someone when you don't know how to do something. You say, hey, show me. You clearly know more. How do I do this? I want to learn. You know, and one of the things that I think changes that for men is actually the kind of the gaze of the anima, you know, the gaze of the woman, and the idea of having to be performative for women to sort of appear competent is where I notice a lot of this kick in. I mean, it's a classic example. Guys walk into a commercial gym, they've never deadlifted in their life, but there's this expectation that somehow they have to be strong. So even if you've never lifted, you've never trained as a lifter, it's so integral to male identity that, like, you need to be Mr. DIY, knows how to fix everything. You need to know how to fight, you need to be strong, you know, or you need to be flipping sexually competent, or you need to be financially competent. And instead of humbling yourself to know where you are in that hierarchy, guys just, you know, they walk up to the bar and they slap, 3 plates each side for the first time, and this guy only weighs 70 kilos, and he tries to deadlift this thing, and then he fucks himself up. And the sad part is no one's getting impressed. Definitely not the woman walking around the gym watching you deadlift with horrible form, but you would look a lot more competent and even attractive, and people would have a lot more respect if you just approach a situation and go, well, this is where how do I do this?
Yes.
So I think that's a lesson that the injuries and combat sports has taught me for anything in life. When I'm learning a new skill set, I'm completely honest. I don't hold any expectations to myself, and I'm just there to learn. That's something that jiu-jitsu has taught me for everything. I'm literally just there to learn. And it's allowed me to learn new skill sets and improve other aspects of my life very quickly, because I've just humbled myself to that approach.
Have that mindset. I love what you said. I'm a very curious and eager to learn person myself. And I love what you said about just being honest and open about where you are, and inviting instruction, or, welcoming the learning.
Yeah.
And also something else you said a bit earlier about going into something where you're not really competent, and just going in head first anyway and doing something stupid and literally seeing your ass is something that happens so much in life. Whereas we would do better, and probably the outcome would be far better if we could stand back and say, I don't know how to do this. 100%. I need help.
100%.
Or I need guidance, or teach me. Whereas we are often expected, and men often expect of each other, and the rest of society expect men to, like you said, know all these things, know how to do these things, almost as if it's a man thing. And they should know all these things. There's nothing wrong with saying, I haven't done this before. Show me, or take the lead, or guide me, or teach me. I love that, and I love you having that outlook on life, and that and it's interesting that you say that you feel you learned that from your own experiences.
Well, the other thing which I think might interest you quite a bit, which is a more interesting, I suppose, part of the story that I'd be quite open about, is I think the biggest improvement where this played out in my life was where that thing of knowing where you need help and knowing where to stick up. I started having kind of severe anxiety attacks and bad mental health problems, and I eventually saw, they wouldn't say so much, but I felt it was affecting my relationship with my family and my friends. And there was all sorts of reasons for that got brought out with my poor mental health. And part of it was induced by kind of, bad usage of recreational drugs and things like that. But I knew I needed help. I knew I needed help mentally and psychologically, and so I chose to book myself into therapy, because I was like, well, this is kind of out of my control, and it's affecting my relationships with other people, and I could repress a lot of things. I could bottle this in. I could just lumber on, but there's also there was a certain element of, I put my pride out the window and I looked at the situation objectively, and it's like, I was a damaged vehicle, and this, you would never see it as a problem to take your car in for a service, yet somehow your brain is just meant to be your psychological well-being is just meant to be this consistent and stable thing that never needs any work throughout your life, and that's just bullshit. Like, you cannot be what is the point of interactions with other human beings if we're completely emotionally sovereign? And there comes a time where, when you are stuck, you have to ask for help. And so I messaged one of the guys also blue belt at our gym, who works as a trauma counselor, Johan, and I'm open about it, and it's part of what he does. It's no I mean, I've never spoken about it too much, but it's no secret. I got hold of him and I was like, listen, fucked up, please help. And we ended up organizing a skill trade so that it was less of a financial hassle for me, but I would be very happy to pay the money. And that was, I think my life has been on a much better journey over the past 6 months since actually working to improve my mental health. It's made a astronomical difference, but that hurdle to just ask for help was like, there was so much dignity and baggage attached to that. It was a very difficult place for me to approach. And this is coming from a guy who I've actually been a very open and vulnerable guy. I mean, you've known me for a while. Like when I've come over, I speak about stuff that a lot of people would be very on the fence about, and I will just nonchalantly kind of bring it up. And so even for me to have those obstacles, I think we must know what it's like for 30, 40-year-old men, who have lived their entire lives behind entire lives. Interesting little Freudian slip there. Behind the guise of sovereignty and masculinity, and then for them to ask for psychological help is almost like an ego death of sorts. Completely destroys their understanding of who they are.
I'm thinking as I'm listening to you that you've told us now very interesting stories about physical injuries and how we recover from those. But I think if we realize and we're ready to acknowledge that we sometimes have emotional or mental injuries, that we also need treatment for, or a rehabilitation program, or some rest, or some time to recover. It's really as simple as that. And we can get training for that and guidance. And also we can also say, I've never done this before. Please show me how.
100%.
So I'm very grateful for you for sharing that and bringing that up, because that's something that in general, and I'm really generalizing now, it's hard for men to talk about.
For sure.
So I'm very grateful that you are willing to share your vulnerability and actually go that far. Thank you for that, Tarquin. It's really as simple as that, is that we need to heal the injuries on whichever level they are. And that's what health is about.
Well, I think also there's the men's health is an interesting thing, because it's such a double-edged sword, to the degree that I think in this day and age, it's important to show the capacity to be vulnerable, but also have the ability to not lock that up, but still to do what men are capable of doing, which is be more emotionally strong. And I think it's recognizing that you can, it's not like or it's and you can,
it's both.
It's both.
Like, and the moment you said being emotionally strong, what came up for me is to be physically strong, because that's also beautiful. That's also part of being a man or a human being. It's perfectly fine to be physically strong, to be the best one at that fighting technique, or an art, as you call it. That's part of it. It's to be physically strong, to be the strongest, to be the best fighter, to be the fittest, the fastest, the strongest, all of those things.
Well, that's what I think with the emotional vulnerability. It makes a big difference when you hear it from, like, there was a guy at our gym who I looked up to. I won't mention his name, but he's a very masculine guy, and a lot of other guys at the gym look up to him as being a very masculine guy, and his work life also reflects that. He's just a very martial dude. And I was sitting and speaking to him, and he's a very physically imposing guy, and he was speaking about his issues with mental health and panic attacks, and just how so that needs to get brought up more frequently. And so when you can see the contrast of someone being able to stably kind of bring that up, it definitely helps a lot. And that's why I think if you are a guy who's in a position of masculine influence, to talk about that as well is also a good thing. With that being said, I want to talk about the double-edged sword, which is also, there's a bit of I think these days, and I'm not going to get too political about it because people can kind of read between the lines, there's definitely a fetishization of the vulnerability of men, because it's kind of a bit of a backlash. It's stripping down traditional masculinity. And I don't think that that's healthy either. You know, I see a lot of posts sort of talking about how men need to open up and men need to cry and men need to be vulnerable. And there's a lot of that comes from a place of people who don't really like men for being men. And that is something which obviously I do not want to associate with, and I personally don't want anything to do with. I also don't really support that. But what they're talking about with men's suicide and men's health is a very good thing, but their reasoning to approach it is very nefarious. You know, it's to try and kind of, I think it's very degrading to try and use the fact that men need therapy and some men need therapy or some men need work on their mental health as kind of a sort of I told you so on traditional masculinity not being what it is, you know, or men aren't actually, you know, these masculine creatures that are capable of violence because look, they cry and they need therapy too. And it's like, to me, masculine strength has nothing to do with the antithesis of poor mental health in a way. I mean, I'm not saying, of course, having mental fortitude and having stoicism and being strong as a man is a very important thing, but it doesn't mean just because a guy will cry in a particular situation does not mean that his masculine front was a persona. You know, just because a man has the ability to hold back the tears to be productive doesn't mean that when he cries it's the big let out of this repressed emotion. You know, men also need to have the freedom and the fluidity to talk about these mental health problems and still hop on your Harley Davidson and go into your boxing gym and deadlift 7 plates and hit the bag. And that mustn't be approached as this compensation thing. It's like, that is who he is, you know? So that's the little caveat I would add on.
Very well said. Very well said. I agree with you. There's a lot to being a man. And I personally don't like to subscribe to anything that puts too many labels or boundaries on it. In the first place, we are all human beings, and being a man, I believe, is open to every man to decide who and what kind of man he wants to be.
100%.
So I loathe putting labels and limits and things on it. So well said, and thank you for bringing that up. It's important that we talk about those things as well. Especially the times we're living in now. I think it's becoming more and more difficult for men to be themselves. To just 100%. Be themselves. And like I said to you earlier, to me, it's equally beautiful to be strong and to, what's the word I'm looking for? To actually, to be able to be dangerous. When it's needed. To be a protector, or to be able to stand up and fight for yourself. And or to be able to cry. Those are 2 extremes that I'm mentioning now, but it's all part of being a person, and it's not exclusive to any gender or
for sure.
Any you know, group or grouping of people. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm so grateful for having this conversation with you, Tarquin. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us. And I admire your persistence, your determination, your diligence, because I don't know if I would have been able to keep on going after so many injuries, to be quite honest, but I'm a bit pieperig, as we say in Afrikaans.
Yeah.
Yes, there's much to be admired. And also, thank you for sharing your life lessons. You've brought a lot to this conversation. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm sure that whoever's going to watch this is going to really find great nuggets of gold in our conversation.
Yeah, I think I'd leave off with, like, I never identified with having perseverance, but I think everyone has, I mean, it's going to sound a little bit soppy, a little bit hippie to end it off, but fundamentally, everyone has a particular perseverance to something that they love. And that can be, you know, a lot of people can see that as delusional, but in the end, it turned out in a way where I don't consider any of the setbacks that I've had sacrifices. You know, even though I have sacrificed quite a lot of my physical longevity and of the kind of the youth that I would have had in my teen years and my early 20s, you know, I didn't take the other path. I wasn't out there having the experiences that other people was having when I was sitting at home, you know, learning how to walk and straighten my leg again or anything like that. But if you don't have, I think if you don't have that, I don't want to say if you don't have that level of perseverance, but if you find yourself returning to something where you should have quit a long time ago, that is something that you're meant to be doing. You know, and people have that in a million different forms throughout their life. So I would say life is far too short to not pursue those things. You know, I would have it would have been the biggest regret of my life if I quit combat sports when I did, in despite of all the nagging voices. So find something that you're willing to suffer for, and
I agree. I agree. That's being in your flow or finding your purpose. There's so many things that we can name, we can call it. I have a last question for you.
Of course.
You're still young. You're 21, turning 22. And you've been through a lot of physical injuries. Have you ever considered or reached a point, or have you got some idea of what would be too much for you? Is there something that would make you stop doing combat sports?
I think as a competitor, for sure. I think where brain health came on the line, that was definitely a point where, you know, I love combat sports enough that you know, if it put me with a limp for the rest of my life, you know, something like that, I mean, fucking even I'm hesitant to go further, but if it affected my ability to fully express my body and do, you know, be athletic, that would be fine. But when it comes to losing cognitive function and losing memories, and that's something that's definitely a place where I would draw the line. But that's why I think a lot of mixed martial artists talk about the willingness to die for their sport. And that's something which I think when you're actively competing, you're a very different person to when you're not actively competing. Having taken a step back from being in competitive mixed martial arts, it's definitely something that I've distanced myself from a lot of that mindset of kind of like being an aesthetic and just recognizing that, you know, in the sort of Buddhist way, that the body is something that can fully degrade if you're pursuing something higher spiritually or mentally. I don't really have that approach now because I'm a coach, and, you know, and I want to improve other areas of my life. But that's kind of the line, you know, mental concussions, things that would affect my personality. But the truth is that I love combat sports enough that when I get back into it, if it affected the health of my body in a, you know, in the ability to hang on pull-up bars and, you know, hike long distances, and that would be something that I'd be willing to lose for good competition. But don't really want to end the conversation there, because I think, as I say, does not have to be that way. You know, because I mean, my job in here is I'm also representing my gym, I'm representing the sport. If you take the right approach to the sport and you are careful, and also if you do S&C on the side, if you are diligent about interacting with a good physio, you don't have to go through any of those processes, you know?
Okay. And I know I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question for you. And let's end on that one, and because I'm sure that's going to be a high note.
Yeah.
What's in the near future for you? Is there another tournament or something coming up?
Yeah, I mean, my MMA debut was a long time in the making, but it's hardly where I want to call it. I mean, fair and square to my opponent, he beat me clean, you know, in a sport based on damage. You know, he damaged me to the point where I couldn't continue, and that was that. But obviously for myself, you know, I dislocated my shoulder very early in the fight. For my foot, you know, other people's words, not mine, my physio said it was the most obscure dislocation he'd ever seen in his life. So it was somewhat of a freak accident. So yeah, I'm definitely coming back to the mixed martial. I see myself coming back to the mixed martial arts world at some stage. Whether people want to walk off and, you know, think that I got completely outclassed is up to them. I know I definitely, I do think my opponent got very lucky that I had one arm as quickly as I did. I can't promise I would have won the fight, but he would have been in for a lot more of a competitive fight otherwise. So I will return to mixed martial arts at some stage. I'm taking a little brief hiatus from competition, and then I'll return to mixed martial arts. I may do a Muay Thai fight at some point. But for now, it's really just about, I want to improve my career as a coach. I'm looking at some other interesting avenues to get into. Might get into remedial sports massage and things like that. And I want to grow my strength and conditioning business with Ruben. So yeah, I'm living out my purpose. I'm doing what makes me happy, and I hope other people do the same.
Fantastic. It sounds good. Tarquin, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Sinta.
I think
it's been amazing to be here.
I think this is a very good example of a get up and grow story. That's why my project's called Get Up and Grow. Hats off to you, Tarquin.
Yeah.
And I hope to see you out there on the mat again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey.